Undercover boss orders breakfast at restaurant freezes. When waitress says tips go to manager. Michael Foster, 50 years old, sat alone in the corner of the cafe. The suit had been replaced by a simple jacket, the cap pulled low, nearly covering his eyes. Looking like just another customer, he watched the rhythms of one of the suburban New Dawn branches he had once painstakingly built. The early morning sunlight streamed through the glass, falling on each table and every bustling staff member's face. The soft clink of spoons against coffee cups, the shuffle of shoes on the tiled floor, everything formed a daily symphony that Michael remembered vividly from the days he first started with a small coffee cart on the corner. He ordered a simple breakfast, golden pancakes and black coffee. While waiting, he scanned the scene, young staff, the manager, familiar customers, and the weary eyes hidden behind practiced smiles. Something felt off. Something didn't align with the values of respect begins with the first meal of the day that he had always believed in and built. Michael's fingers tightened around the white porcelain cup as an unease stirred in his chest. Did this place still carry the spirit he once breathed into every small branch? And so he sat back, ready to listen, ready to face the truth as if embarking on a journey back to the roots to find what he might have lost among revenue reports and cold management meetings. Michael took a sip of the black coffee, the familiar bitterness, yet it didn't taste complete today. His eyes followed the movements of a young waitress. She was in her early 20s, hair tied neatly, her apron slightly wrinkled at the HEMA mark of a busy morning. But in her polite smile, Michael sensed something unfamiliar, a trace of fatigue behind her gaze. When she placed the pancakes in front of him, Michael smiled gently and asked, "Breakfast crowd seems good today? The tips must be decent too?" She hesitated for a moment, her eyes flicking to the distant manager's desk as if to make sure no one overheard. Then she answered softly, her voice barely more than a whisper, as if afraid to break something fragile. "Well, the manager collects all the tips, sir." That sentence felt like a blade cutting into Michael's heart. A cold shiver ran down his spine. Tips, something he had always believed to be the rightful reward for those who dedicated themselves to serving guests, were now being pocketed by a manager, distributed at will, with no explanation. A system he had designed to honor dedication had turned into a tool to exploit the weakest. Michael clenched his fingers around the coffee cup, his gaze fixed on the girl who was still trying to hide her sadness behind her smile. In that moment, he understood. Some things never make it into the reports, and it's precisely those small things that brought him here today. Michael stayed a while longer, gently spinning the now cold coffee cup, his eyes following every step the young waitress took. She, with that same friendly smile, kept welcoming customers and tending each table with a dedication not everyone could sustain. But behind that smile, Michael saw something out of place. Every time a customer paid, he noticed the tips were always collected by staff and then handed over to the manager quickly, without a word of explanation. The young woman's face would darken for a moment, then try to hide it behind a smile. Michael seized the chance while she was clearing a nearby table and gently asked, "Do you often get tips directly? I mean, do customers ever hand them straight to you?" She hesitated, glanced toward the manager's counter, then reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small, worn notebook. She opened it slowly and handed it to Michael like a silent cry for help. In the dim light of the cafe, handwritten notes were clearly visible. 3分之02 5点00 3分之04 10点00 3分之0 Luke Ba Wusher Total over $300 in just a few weeks. But all of it had disappeared. Michael clenched the small notebook in his hand, a mix of anger and sorrow filling his chest. The system he had once trusted, had once built to protect those who served customers with dedication, had now become a tool to strip away their hard work. If he stayed silent, he would be just another accomplice, someone who let that wrong exist without daring to call it by its true name. Michael's gaze returned to the young woman still smiling, still standing in the serving position, and he knew, if he didn't act today, he would also be just another shadow outside the fairness he had once promised to uphold. He sighed quietly, placed the notebook on the table, and looked around the cafe. The warm atmosphere that had once been New Dawn's pride now seemed to carry an invisible crack. The customers' laughter, the clinking of dishes, everything still flowed as if nothing were wrong. But Michael knew that peace was only a facade, and it was devouring the kind-hearted people like that young woman. He looked back at her, seeing her still trying to maintain a smile. Each time a customer left the table, She bowed her head slightly, her eyes avoiding others, as if afraid someone might see the fatigue behind that face. She continued clearing tables, carefully wiping each plate with small, red, swollen finger signs of long shifts and endless scrubbing. In that moment, Michael remembered those early days when he and a few loyal staff members stood in a tiny kitchen, cooking, cleaning, and learning to listen to customers. Back then, every server was considered the soul of the restaurant. Tips weren't just a reward, they were a thank you, a recognition of every drop of sweat and every genuine smile. But now, tips had become a management fee collected behind the counter merely to legitimize an unnamed sum. Michael clenched his hand, his eyes growing cold and resolute. He knew the original policy was born to protect employees' rights, to distribute tips fairly if needed, but not to turn tips into power in the hands of managers. He nodded slightly, as if telling himself, this isn't just a system that needs fixing, it's a soul that needs to be called by its right name. And he, Michael Foster, was the one who had to stand up and do it. If not, New Dawn would be nothing but a soulless name, a place where even a server's smile is forced to be sold to the system. Michael stood up, his gaze fixed on the management counter, where the tip money was still being collected after every customer left. He walked forward, a determination surging through him that could not be shaken. Today, he would not let this system continue to teach employees that kindness must be exchanged for silence. No one who serves customers every morning should have to go without the reward they deserve, and no system has the right to turn tips into a tool for exploitation. Friday morning, the sky was gray, raindrops misting on the window, but inside New Dawn, something was heating up, something that had just been awakened. Michael Foster walked into the cafe, no longer wearing a beanie or old coat. A tailored gray suit, neatly knotted tie, and piercing eyes made the entire cafe pause for a moment. The staff behind the counter looked surprised. The server, the one who had shared the small notebook with him, froze when their eyes met. In that moment, Michael saw hope in her eyes, like she was waiting for a promise to be kept. He took a deep breath, his voice low and resolute. I want all staff to gather in the meeting room, right now. In the small room, the warm yellow light cast over the faces of the young staff. Michael plugged a USB into the POS screen, and the video started to play. The server gently placed a pancake in front of a customer, bowed her head in thanks, and smiled warmly. The customer pressed, tip, $5 on the card reader. The POS screen recorded the transaction, but the money disappeared, and her name never appeared. A sigh sounded, small as a whisper of wind. Michael looked around at everyone, his voice not loud, but enough to reach every corner. I once believed New Dawn was a place where every employee was seen, where every employee was respected. But this video tells me something else, that there have been people smiling at customers every morning who never received the reward they rightly earned. He exhaled, his eyes turning sharp. Decisive actions. Fire the manager who stole tips from staff right there on the spot. No need to wait for an office report. Update the POS system. Every tip goes straight into the hands of the server, displayed transparently and publicly on the receipt, with no one allowed to interfere. Appoint the server as service culture assistanto, inspire others, and share the spirit of dedication she had protected all this time. Michael looked up, his voice firm but warm. No one who serves customers every morning should have to go without the reward they deserve, and no system has the right to turn tips into a tool for exploitation. A light breeze drifted in through the small window, carrying the warmth of fresh-baked pastries, and for the first time in that room, everyone knew. The scent of justice, the scent of renewed trust, had finally found its rightful place. The atmosphere in the meeting room seemed to thicken after Michael's resolute declaration. His gaze moved slowly from person to person, missing no hesitant glances or worried eyes. The manager bowed his head, unable to meet Michael's eyes. The server gripped her apron tightly, tears welling but still holding her smile as if this very moment was helping her reclaim herself. Michael stepped forward, placing his hand gently on the girl's shoulder, his gaze softening, though his voice remained steady. Thank you for daring to hold on to what's right, and for believing there's still someone here who's willing to listen, willing to see. He turned to address everyone. I know there were times when you thought, tips are nothing, just a small reward. But today, I want you to know, tips are the sweat of your labor, the customer's thank you, the seal of dedication. And I, as CEO, will not allow anyone to take that reward away. Michael drew a breath, his voice low, as if making a confession. I've made mistakes too. I trusted the system and forgot that behind it are people. I got lost in the reports and forgot that behind every smile there were tears too. And if I stay silent today, I'd be nothing more than someone watching through glass, too afraid to step in. He stood tall, his eyes shining with conviction. But I'm here now, I've seen, and I will make it right. He turned to the manager, his voice unwavering. Right here, right now, I officially announce, you are terminated because you betrayed the values of New Dawn. The room seemed to hold its breath. Michael gestured to his assistant to document the decision. Then he turned back to the server, his gaze warm. You're not just a server, you've proven that you're the guardian of New Dawn's spirit. From today on, you are officially service culture assistant, sharing your story so that everyone understands tips are not just money, they are the acknowledgement of kindness. Applause erupted, not all at once, but gradually enough to fill the room with hope. Michael nodded, his eyes firm but also glistening, as if he too was relearning how to name a belief that had been with him since the very beginning. A fresh breeze drifted through the window, carrying the scent of coffee and warm pastries. In that room, everyone could now hear more clearly the heartbeat of those who served not just because of the tips, but because they knew their names were being called in the right place. System change. 1 week later, on the announcement board at every New Dawn branch, a handwritten line in bold red ink stood out. All tips paid directly to the server, no intermediaries, no permission required. Under the warm yellow light, that line felt like a pledge. From now on, those who directly serve customers would be respected and receive their rightful rewards. About the server, she was no longer just the girl behind the pancake counter every morning. She had been appointed as the service culture assistant, sharing her own story with new hires, her voice warm and her gaze determined. Tips aren't just money, they're the customer's thank you, the trust of a system, and a way to truly name those silent servers. Human moment. One Monday morning, Michael returned to the familiar branch. The cafe was still bustling, filled with laughter and chatter. He found his old table, where he had once watched that server in action. On the table, instead of a receipt or report, there was only a cup of black coffee and a small, neatly folded note. Thank you for calling the right name of the silent servers. Michael held the note gently, his eyes lifting to meet the gaze of that same girl now, the voice of inspiration. She simply smiled, her eyes steady, as if passing on strength to the next generation of servers. Building and growing the system. After the new policy was implemented, Michael didn't stop at handwritten notices. He launched regular discussions between management and staff at each branch. In a small meeting room, warm yellow lights glowed as Michael stood before them, his voice deep yet gentle. I want to hear what's still holding you back. I want to see with my own eyes who needs us more than a piece of paper. Oh. He required every branch manager to submit detailed reports on work hours and each employee's tips. No more pooling, no more ambiguity. Michael personally reviewed every case and listened to every story, ensuring that everyone was treated with the respect they deserved. About the waitress. She didn't just tell her story with words. In her hands now was a new notebook recording every experience, every grateful glance, every smile she had ever shared. That notebook had become part of the internal training curriculum, helping new employees understand that serving wasn't just about carrying plates, it was about preserving the dignity of their profession. One Thursday morning, she stood in front of a group of new hires, her eyes confident yet still humble. Never underestimate the value of the smile you give to a guest, and never let any system forget your name. Extending the human moment. The next day, at Michael's familiar table, a pancake was placed neatly alongside a cup of black coffee. Beneath the plate, a handwritten note. If you don't see our names, then who will? Michael unfolded the note, the handwriting still trembling but full of courage. He looked up, his gaze distant as if making a promise to himself. No one should ever have to ask that question again. A fair system doesn't just pay tips to the right person, it also dares to confront the unease felt by those behind the counter. It doesn't treat tips as a favor, but as a way to honor those who make every breakfast smile possible. A story like a slice of life. Not every voice is loud enough to be heard, but when a leader is patient enough to stop, listen, and act, that's when every system finds its original worth again. Because in the end, a restaurant doesn't just sell pancakes. It offers hope, trust, and pride to those who have carried, washed, and wiped, giving a part of their heart to keep this place alive. New Dawn is not just a chain of restaurants. It's a home for silent servers, now called by name and given back their rightful place.